If the war continues, you see a short war again, or do you see this getting, you see Trump getting bogged down in a prolonged conflict? Because that's where the escalation trap comes in. He's like, because he can just walk away now, but he's like, if I walk away, it's really bad. Maybe if one more strike, I could get a bit more concessions. And then he does more strikes, doesn't work. Okay, maybe if we strike the energy infrastructure, and that's how the escalation trap goes, and maybe if Iran causes significant damage to an aircraft carrier, then Trump has to, for political purposes, has to respond again more aggressively, and that's how things that's how things like World War I started. I'm not saying we're going to start a new world war, but is there a worry that this could become a prolonged conflict, and is Iran ready for that?
Iran is totally ready for that. Iran has more missiles and drones compared to what they had before this war started. They're prepared for that. Araghchi said 120%.
Yeah, but I think he's over exaggerating. I think it would be. Like, I know that the reports on the Western media that it was like 50% down has obviously been debunked by the CNN report.
They're talking about 70%. Their assessment.
Yeah, now 90%.
Iran has 70% of the arsenal 90. They had before this war started.
No, I think it's 90% now, according to the latest CNN report, if I'm not wrong, because they've removed the rubble from the entrances to a lot of these underground bunkers. So CNN report says 90%, which I tend to find obviously more believable, but 120, because the US dropped such a significant amount of ordnance on the country that saying that even 90% is a high number.
Let's assume Iran is bragging. These estimations are optimistic, or they're giving
which is already crazy. Yes, 90, even 70% is crazy.
Yeah, the United States is not going to be able to fight this war. It depends on the intensity of the third round of war. It can take something like 10 days, a week. It depends on the intensity. It can take like something 2 weeks. And I don't see look at what has happened so far. Iran has produced more weapons, more missiles and drones since the ceasefire started. The United States did the United States replace any of those radars that have been destroyed during the war?
No, it takes a long time to replace.
They're not producing that much of missiles, cruise missiles, JASSM, JDAMs, interceptors for THAAD system, PAC-3 for Patriot system. They're not producing that much of that. That's why I don't see the United States being able to continue this war the way it was during the 40 days of war, because that war has happened with some sort of understanding that they can bring down the government. But let me put it this way, Mario, because it's not about Iran. Iran is just sitting back and watching what the United States want to do. They're going to react, or they're going to respond to the United States. Today, what we've learned from Robert Kagan, he simply says, this is the moment that the United States has to leave the region because they don't have a viable choice, a viable option. The other part of neocons in the United States are arguing the United States can continue this hostility in the region. They can continue with the blockade or with some sort of blockade in the region, cooperating with GCC countries, and again sending weapons to Iranian people and make some sort of chaos to do so-called regime change in Iran. This is the two concepts of the neocons in the United States. I think the second option, which is totally basically seeking regime change in Iran, is outdated. They don't understand the reality of what's going on today in Iran.
What about the first option of economic warfare? Do you think that could work? Because we're getting conflicting reports on how badly. Most reports are indicating that Iran could withstand this for a few months, but there are other reports saying that the economy is showing significant troubles. Hard to know. What's your sense?
No, Iran is not. I would say the pressures on the Iranian economy are there as there were before the war started. I would say during those days that we had, in December 2025 and January 2026 with that protest and riots, people were feeling that pressure coming, but they didn't know what is the source of that pressure. What is happening? Why are they feeling so much pressure, economic pressure? But right now they understand this was the preparation of the war against them. And that's why I don't see Iran doesn't have any problem of just reducing the export of oil to zero, because they had it before during the first Trump administration. Remember what Donald Trump said. If we reduce the export of Iranian oil, everything gonna explode in Iran. All these oil facilities. That didn't happen, because Iran knows how to deal with that. They had this sort of problem for 46 years. It's more than 2-3 decades.
But they never had a blockade. But they've never had a full blockade. They've always had. They've had their shadow fleet export their oil to countries like China and Russia. But this time around, you've got not Russia, obviously, to China and some other.
But the full blockade is not working. How much?
Yeah,
do you think that they're going to block everything
through.
in this? No, that's not happening. That's the rhetoric that Donald Trump is trying to sell us. I know the reality is totally different from what Donald Trump is picturing for us. I don't want to emphasize what is happening, but the blockade is something effective, something 10-15%, not more than that. We know what's happening with the case of Pakistan, the cooperation with Pakistan, and how Iran is, Iran is not only just the Persian Gulf. You go up to the Caspian Sea, they have their connection. They don't have these sort of problems like other countries in the region. And that's why the United States knows that. But they have to solve this sort of blockade that is doing great, because that's why Donald Trump can keep with this sort of policy in the Middle East. If that wasn't the case, how you can convince the American people, what are you doing in the Middle East if there is no war? Because they're selling that the blockade is doing just perfectly well for the United States.